Welcome, everybody. My name is Giuseppe Palumbo. I'm a lecturer in English language and translation studies at the University of Trieste. I will be coordinating the group of students that this year in the spring will be working together with students at the University of Minnesota. And I've decided to prepare this short video presentation as an introduction to introduce myself to students at the University of Minnesota and to give them an idea of what we train our students on here at the University of Trieste, where they study languages with a view to becoming professional translators. Now, first of all, what is translation? By translation, with the word translation, we can refer to a translated text, the product of translation, the product of language transfer from one particular language to another particular language. But also, by the word translation, we refer to the act of translating. In everyday situation, what some scholars call natural translation, or as a job, that is in professional translation. What does it mean to translate? Instinctively, many people think of translation as just the replacement of words in one language with the equivalent corresponding words in the other language. Here we have some examples of individual words in English with their possible equivalent in Italian. Sun, a noun, great, an adjective, and run, which could be a verb and therefore translated in a certain way in Italian with the equivalent verb. But as soon as we provide even just a linguistic context for these individual words, we notice that their equivalent in the other language may be different. So that, for instance, some cream becomes crema solare with one word, with the word sole in this particular case becoming an adjective in Italian. We could also think of translation as the replacement of entire utterances rather than just either individual words or words in their immediate context. In these cases, people who discuss translation talk about a different translation unit. In the previous examples, the translation unit considered was either a single individual word or a phrase in which a given word appeared. In this particular case, we are considering a more extended translation unit in which, in the two languages, words will not be, strictly speaking, the dictionary equivalents of each other, but still the two utterances will be seen as corresponding to each other in terms of what they communicate to the readers or hearers. In other more extreme cases, but not as rare as you may think, translating means to replace a whole text in one language with a different text in the other language that, however, has the same function. Think, for example, of disclaimer texts found, for instance, in web pages. In these particular cases, they will very likely be different in the two languages involved, maybe because of extra-linguistic, for example, legal reasons. When people talk about translation approaches, strategies adopted by translators, a very common distinction is that between word-for-word approaches and sense-for-sense approaches. And we've seen examples of both types of strategies or approaches in the previous slides. Both are possible, and the reasons why you as a translator will choose one over the other ultimately depends on different factors. Sometimes different approaches are required because a particular language pair will force you to adopt one strategy over the other. Think, for instance, of very distant languages such as Chinese and Italian or Chinese and English. When you translate between those two languages, it will be very hard to stick to a word-for-word approach, and so you will probably more likely use more frequently a sense-for-sense approach. In other cases, it will be the context or the situation that will require one approach over another. And as we've seen with the disclaimer text example, in other cases, what counts is the function of a particular utterance or text. Just to give you one more example of how a particular situation will determine the kind of approach that the translator adopts in translating. Let's look at this short sentence in English that shows you how what linguists call a pragmatic element is what matters here in determining the translation approach. If in English we say something like, there are a few things you might want to keep in mind before you do something else, we take this, we as readers or hearers, take this as a particular polite way of inviting someone to do something, or recommending a particular course of action. And it's very unlikely that we will choose the same wording, especially as far as the verb is concerned here. You might want to, in other languages, to express in the same polite way the invitation or the recommendation to do something. This is another example of different legal requirements that might matter when we compare the same messages in different languages. Look at this sign in English, telling people that in a particular place, public space, there's a CCTV system in operation. Equivalent signs in Italian are required legally to also mention the Parliament Act that mentions the need to tell people that a CCTV system is in operation in public spaces. The two signs will therefore be equivalent, even though they do not have the same elements. The one in Italian is longer because it has extra elements compared to the English, but they could be taken as one, as the translation of each other. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned translation as an activity and as a job, and this is what we train our students on in our department. Professional translators are people who earn a living by translating. Ideally, they are people who know about languages, who know how to use languages, and know how languages are used in different contexts and in different situations. And I hope that the very basic examples I gave in the previous slides gave you an idea of language used and some of the considerations that you might want to take into account when transferring from one language to the other. Professional translators mostly translate specialized technical material, and the slide here lists some of the types of texts that a professional translator might be faced with in his daily activity: catalog, reports, instructions, promotional material, audiovisual material, books, and increasingly over the last decades, software, and especially user interface elements of software and web pages. Most professional translators, the vast majority of professional translators, work with dedicated software tools. These are tools that help translators in basically two ways. They act as very efficient archives of past translations, and these are translation memories, which tell people how tell the translator how a certain, say, phrase or sentence was translated in the past, so that this sentence can be reused for new translation of similar or exactly identical sentences in the new texts that the translator is faced with. Machine translation is also used increasingly, in a lot of cases, as a way of obtaining a very first draft that then has to be polished. And term bases are also used to store specialized terminology, retrieve it, and insert it in the new text to be translated. The use of these dedicated software tools has put a renewed emphasis on reading and editing skills. In many cases, computers help translators with drafts that then translators mainly have to polish and edit according to what the particular quality requirements of the translation brief are. I will leave you with one last slide. While navigating the internet, many of you might have heard the term localization used instead of translation. This term, this label, did not exist before the spread of computers and computer networks. A lot of people now today equate the two terms. Some people think that localization is something more than translation, in that it also implies an element of cultural adaptation, which on the other hand is also what translation is, as I hope was clear in some of the examples I gave you. But I'll leave you with this question mark. This might be the topic of a new video presentation. I hope you enjoyed this. See you next time.